Para conocer la experiencia australiana, Keith Springer expondrá Coordinación con stakeholders para eradicaciones exitosas.
Good morning again. This presentation, yes, is very focused in that I want to develop more ideas about stakeholder groups and stakeholder management in eradication projects. And again, I'll use the Macquarie Island eradication as a case study. But what do I mean by a stakeholder? Really, a stakeholder is it's a very broad concept. So anybody with an influence or an interest in implementing an eradication project. Some examples: people with an interest might be people with a connection to a particular island. They may be resident or non-resident, but they're interested in that island, so they're interested in what's happening there, what you want to do there. Influence may be a government agency or a government official who has to assess your environmental impact assessment, for example, and decide if they're going to allow you to proceed with this project or not. So it's a huge range of people or agencies that are included in stakeholders. Now, I showed this slide in my previous presentation, and in this one I want to focus on two of the plans that we used that were the plans that were most involved in stakeholder management. And for us it was the communications plan and the project plan. So I'll talk a little bit about those two plans. Firstly, the project plan. And the project plan is really not much to do with eradicating pests from an island. It's all about how the project will be managed. And so the project plan says what is the scope of the project and what is outside the scope of the project. It talks about the objectives of the project and what the desired outcomes are from implementing the project. It talks about the governance of the project, how it will be managed, who will be responsible for overseeing various aspects of the project management. And it should also identify risks to the project and issues that the project is likely to face. And through that identification, you can then start to decide how those risks and issues can be managed. It's probably important to have a short summary of the work plan, because a lot of the risks and issues that will be identified will be associated with various aspects of the work plan. The communications plan, and I'm talking about the project I was working on, the communications plan is the document where we set out all of the ways in which we would communicate with our stakeholders. And of course, to do that, we had to identify who our stakeholders were and how we would communicate information on the progress and the outcomes of the project to all of those varying stakeholders. So the communications plan for us was the document where we identified who was going to be interested, the sorts of things or the reasons that they would be interested, and the means of communicating progress or issues with the project to each of those separate bodies. And again, it should include a summary of those risks and issues, because those are the ones you're most likely to spend the biggest amount of time on. A lot of people won't be interested in much of the fine detail of what you're doing. They're only going to be interested in the things that affect them most. So spending a bit of time writing up a summary of the known risks can be quite valuable from that point of view. And of course, a strategy in your plan as to how those risks will be managed. So for the Macquarie project, this was the strategy out of the communications plan. And I'll just reinforce some of the points involved here, because to me those are the key points which will influence how successful you communicate your message to the stakeholders. So the first one is having a proactive focus. So by that I mean don't wait for an issue to become public or too far advanced. Work on the front foot and contact stakeholders before issues get too big, because it's sometimes possible to have them more manageable if they're understood and known by the stakeholders. So that one for us was very important, and associated with that, we said right from the outset we have nothing to hide with this project. There will be some things that will probably go wrong, because every single project that I've been involved with has had something go wrong, which might mean that I'm the common denominator making things go wrong. But it's inevitable. The bigger the project, the more things will not go to plan. And so we wanted to make sure that all of the people that were our stakeholders could trust us to tell them if there were things that were coming up that they should know about. So we had that underlying policy of nothing to hide and no surprises. This identifying stakeholders was a worthwhile exercise for us, because we just it forced us to sit down and write down all of the agencies or individuals who could possibly be interested in this project and what we were doing, and analyse where their areas of interest were, like their likely concerns, and some of the ways that we could engage with them. And then targeting those communications. So for people with a specific interest in the project, for example, we wrote a newsletter which came out 3 times a year. So for people who weren't directly involved but wanted to be kept updated, we had a database, and there was about 600 people on it, and the newsletter went out to them. There were other methods as well. Website information is good for interested members of the public who can search for information and find information online. And then for this one, for the important stakeholders, and for example the government ministers and officials who don't know the detail of what you're doing, but sort of need to be informed enough if they're responding to questions in Parliament, Congress, then we would do tailored briefings for them. So we would sit down with them and just go through point by point what we were doing, where we were up to, what issues we were facing. And often we didn't need them to provide any answers for us. It was just purely updating them so that in their circles they had the information in here that they could pass on to other people. And through that way we were able to sort of spread support at a wider level. This, I don't want you to worry about all the text here. This is just from our communications plan, and the thing I wanted to focus on was these column headings up here. So for us, this is what we wanted to make sure that we captured. So for we identified the stakeholder group, who it was. In the case of government departments, there were often numerous divisions, sometimes of the same department, who were going to have an interest in this project or an influence in the project. We identified what we thought their position would be, whether they were supportive or neutral or opposed or concerned. And for for example, some of the animal welfare, animal ethics committees, we thought that they would be concerned. We had a column for the likely interest of each stakeholder group, what it was that they were going to be concerned by or interested by. So, for example, of the animal welfare and animal ethics committees, we identified that their likely interest was going to be in animal welfare through the use of firearms and traps and intoxicants, and also non-target risks as well. And so we had maybe 10 pages of this table that identified all of our stakeholders, and then carrying on how we would reach them, what communications tools could we use, who was responsible for implementing that, and a time frame. And some of those time frames were very short term. At the start of the project we would provide information, and then often people would say, fine, that's all I need. Others wanted to be kept updated all the way through an 8-year project. I want to give you some examples of what we identified as risk areas for our project, as an example of what could go into a communications plan. So shipping was a huge risk for us because we needed a ship that was large enough to have 4 helicopters in a hangar and a hold big enough to take over 300 tonnes of bait and enough passenger accommodation for our team of 30 people. And when we looked at the local shipping industry, there were very few ships that met all those criteria. So, and there was one ship which was a very good fit for that, but it was very expensive. So the risk for us was that we would have to use that one expensive ship simply because there were no alternatives. So we contracted a shipping broker to cast the net wider and look for ships elsewhere. Now in the end, we had to use that expensive ship, but it was still worth identifying as a risk, because if that one ship had not been available when we needed it, our project was not even going to start. So that was sort of the thinking around that area. Recruitment. I said earlier we needed, just for our field staff, we needed 50 people over a 5-year period. Sorry, 60 people over a 5-year period. In addition, we needed to recruit helicopter pilots and engineers and specialists in geographic information systems. And so thinking that you're asking these people to go and live on a subantarctic island sometimes for 12 months and work in the field where it's cold, wet, miserable, no internet, no mobile phone coverage. All of those things can provide a challenge, and again, if you can't attract the sort of people that you need when you need them, your project isn't going anywhere. And there was a question about who's doing the dirty work from Erin's talk, and for us this was the same question: who's going to do all this? Who's going to go and do all the rabbit hunting after we've finished our baiting? So making sure that we had strategies in place to manage that risk was an important one for us too. Procurement timeframes, it would, because of the value in some of our contracts, we had to tender, and it might take us 3 months just to write the tender documents. They're that complex. We have to have lawyers to advise us on the wording. They have to be advertised. You have to wait a period for people to submit tenders. So all of these things can add several months to your overall time frame. And when we started the project, we had a ship departure date of April 2010. So in 2007, 2008, 2009, all of the way through our planning work, we knew that everything had to be ready by April 2010. So if we were late starting a tender for helicopters, for example, we ran the risk of not having time to do all the planning work with our selected contractor before we needed to be on the ship and gone. And the same risk applied to every single tender or procurement action that we did. The biosecurity plan was a huge challenge for us in the project team, because the responsibility for biosecurity to Macquarie Island lies with a different department. And we engaged with them very early and said, we want to have your biosecurity procedures upgraded to a certain level before we even leave for the island, so that everything's already in place and is understood and accepted. And they weren't really interested. And so even after we'd finished the aerial baiting in 2011, they had still not lifted the biosecurity standards to the level we wanted, but it was not something we could control. So we were really, really concerned that the inability of another agency to lift their game would compromise the outcomes of the whole project that we were spending so much time and money on. With the monitoring plan, that was a risk for us, because there are a number of scientists who work on Macquarie Island, and there's only so many beds on the island. And when we came along, we said, we want most of those beds for our hunters, for our staff. And so the scientist said, well, hang on, what about my seal research, my plant research, my penguin research that I've been doing for 15 years? And we said, sorry, there's simply no room. Your project will have to go on hold for 5 years while we get rid of the rabbits and the rodents, and then you should be able to come back. And as you can imagine, some of the scientists weren't very happy to be told that. So that was another one that we had to manage with our stakeholders, to try and get the scientists to understand why we were shutting them out from their work for a few years. And in the end, some of them accepted it, and some of them didn't want to accept it, but really had no choice. So, this one, I mentioned earlier, there's always things in a project like this where the budget planning is done very early, so that you can submit a proposal to government or whoever's going to fund the project. And usually the accountants will look at it and they'll say, oh, well, you've asked for all these things, you probably don't need that much money, we'll give you a little bit less than you're asking for. But there are always things that come up in every project which you haven't foreseen, or as circumstances change, that come with a cost, a dollar cost. And so for me, it was really important that we had a contingency sum in our budget to allow for all of those unexpected costs, so that we weren't compromised in our ability to undertake the project simply because we ran out of money. And I had a long discussion with the Environment Department accountants in Canberra, and they went through the 5 pages of the budget items line by line by line, and I had to defend the reason why this budget item was there. And then I said, I want 25% contingency sum, 25% of the total budget. And they laughed and laughed and laughed, and they said, no, projects, the maximum contingency for projects is 10%. And at that stage, oil prices were $130, $140 a barrel, and the price of fuel was going very high, and a big part of our costs were shipping fuel and helicopter fuel. So I said, look, there's a huge unknown there with a big cost implication if oil prices keep going up like they have been. Foreign exchange, a lot of our budget was budgeted in New Zealand dollars, and if the exchange rate changed, that had big implications too. So in the end, they accepted my arguments, and we negotiated a 20% contingency sum. And in the end, we didn't need it. But the important thing was that we had it there if we did need it. And it's always easy to have the budget there committed and not spend it all and give it back, than it is to go back to government and say, we need more, we need more, we need more. So that was another risk that we looked at. And then there was this overall time frame. We had so many balls in the air with the various planning phases: dogs, helicopters, ships, bait, staff, and all of them had to dovetail to the point where they were all finished by April 2010. And we only had 3 people on our project team who were doing all of these things. So for us, there was a risk that as time went on, if we slipped in the timeframes of some of those components, we would not meet the deadline for the ship departure. And of course, with the ship, they lock in. If you don't want them on a certain date, they want to go and do something else. So really important for us that all of those various facets that we were working on were completed and ready by April 2010. And in fact, we really said February 2010, so that we have a couple of months up our sleeve to allow for any slippage or things that we haven't foreseen. So those are some of the risks that we identified in our communication plan that we were giving updates on to our key stakeholders, particularly government ministers and government officials, so that they were confident that they knew the progress of the project and whether it was on track. How did we reach our stakeholders? We had a website which was not updated as often as I wanted, but it did provide some information. We sent out the newsletter, as I mentioned, and we had a fact sheet which we used for sort of general public displays. The briefings, we did those probably 2 or 3 times a year. There were various media who were coming to us for information and doing stories, television, radio, and print media, all doing items on the Macquarie project. We held about 3 public forums where members of the public could come along and hear about what we were doing and ask questions. And then attending conferences and seminars was another way to provide information. And this was typically to peer groups. So often it might be vertebrate pest conferences or things like that. And then finally, recording the project. And we did have a documentary made, which we may have time to screen later this afternoon. Runs for about 25 minutes. And that was a way of trying to present how the project was undertaken to a wider audience. And finally, publishing papers in various journals, which we've done a little bit of, but still have a couple to do. Talking more, so we've talked about stakeholder management in general terms, but particularly community engagement, I think, is a very important one. Partly because the idea of the community accepting or endorsing any project can be critical of whether it goes ahead or not. And as we've started to talk about a little bit, islands with a resident population, this is really, really critical, because without that community buy-in, it can be really, really difficult to get a project off the ground. And I think this this aspect of community engagement here is also important, because especially if the community don't really trust the government. I know where I come from, nobody really trusts the government, and I suspect that that's common to many countries. So if you're seen as a group of people who are trying to achieve a particular outcome, even though you still may be government, if you can get community engagement and buy-in, then it helps enhance their trust in you as an agency. They may still have this generic mistrust of the wider government, but if you can get them to trust you as an agency, or a group of people within an agency, then with that better relationship, then you're more likely to be able to move forward and get understanding and progress your project. There's a bigger thing there too, because in this field that we work in, or I work in, it's very niche. Most of the wider public don't understand or care about the concept of restoring island ecosystems. But if you can get some understanding of that, then it can help a much wider concept as well, in terms of wider biodiversity and environmental consciousness, if you like. So little steps can lead to, or perhaps another analogy would be throwing a stone into a pool of water, and the ripples spread out, and the further they spread, the lower they are, or the less impact they have, but they still are all cumulative over time. And then finally, this one, which again we've talked about a little bit today, biosecurity measures. If you can't keep pests off an island, there's probably no point in getting rid of them in the first place, because you'll spend a lot of money for very little conservation gain. Now, in an island a long way away, like South Georgia or Macquarie, distance is your friend. So it's unlikely that rodents they can't swim back, or rabbits, they can't swim back. But in close islands with a regular ferry or something like that, or an air link, it's very easy for rodents to get back on again. So that's where the biosecurity procedures need to be good. And the procedures are only good if people comply with them. So if nobody's going to be interested in checking their bags or checking cargo for rodents, then the chances of those pests getting back onto the island are actually quite high. So you need to be thinking, it's all very well to get rid of the pests, but without a biosecurity plan or strategy or procedures in place, you may be wasting your time. And on inhabited islands, that's where it's really critical to have that. The people on the island have to want to keep their island pest-free, rat-free, whatever. So they need to buy into the concept. I think in Chile, this term of stakeholders, there's a wide range of people internationally who work in the pest management field, island eradication work and things like that, and they're all part of your stakeholder groups. And I say that because the island eradication community is geographically very widely dispersed, but professionally very closely linked. We all talk to each other, and we all believe in the outcomes that we can achieve. So we all tend to support each other because we all want to see other countries, other agencies succeed, because if failures cheapen the brand, if you like. It's hard to convince people that this is a good thing if a number of them don't work. And luckily, the success rate, as Aaron said, is very high. but the international community are keen to keep it high and keep it improving. So we're all interested in what other countries are doing, and for that reason, it's usually a discipline where people share information very well. So with that in mind, there is a pool of international, I suppose, expertise, people with experience who can assist in advising projects anywhere in the world, including Chile, if that sort of assistance is requested. And the sort of things that they can do is review planning documents. And so although I'm based I'm based anywhere at the moment, actually, but let's say Australia, I'm currently working on reviewing planning documents for Italy, or in Italy, in New Zealand, and in the Galapagos Islands. So just an example of sort of how we can contribute by reviewing planning documents. What we can't do is tell you how to do it in your country, because only you know how it works in your country. You have the knowledge of the legislative framework, the social framework, and the regulatory framework that will tell you how you're going to be able to do your project. So outsiders can't do that for you. That's the knowledge that you have and the experience that you have. But internationally, there's certainly scope for assistance. And I think, oops, back one. This final one down here, I think there's no doubt, all the projects that I've been involved with, dialogue with stakeholders has been a core part of the work. Even if the project is ultimately unsuccessful, the dialogue as you go through is just absolutely important. A couple of things that I think enhance the success of eradication projects. One is that you really have to cooperate with other agencies and other groups, because certainly all of the ones that I've been involved with, you have to have cooperation with other, whether it's landowners or other government departments or funding bodies or whoever. So you can't do these alone. You have to build a little consortium of interested people and talk to them to make sure that these work. And again, in my experience, what's really helpful is when all of the agencies have somebody in them. It won't be everybody in the agency, because everybody tends to be busy and with their own priorities, but you need somebody in those agencies who believes in the outcome that you're trying to achieve. And it's those people who are sitting there behind a desk somewhere, but who have that belief in the outcome, that are your strong allies, because they're the ones who can be bothered to do something a little bit extra that will get you a consent or an approval, or stand up for you in the tea room when other people are saying that this will never work and things like that. So you do need those key allies in various agencies. I want to give a little example of the sort of international expertise with the New Zealand Department of Conservation. They have a group of about six people who have all worked in a number of island pest eradications, and they form a group called the Island Eradication Advisory Group. And they were set up to advise and support project managers, primarily in New Zealand, on some of the technical and strategic elements of eradication projects. And over the years, as people heard of the pool of expertise, people from other countries started to say, could you help me with this as well? And as I did with Macquarie Island, we went to the IEAG and we had a formal agreement between the general managers of Department of Conservation and my agency, Parks and Wildlife, about the support that IEAG would provide. So what they prefer to do is review documents and make contributions to advice on how to do things. And if requested, they usually have a pool of experienced operators who they can make available to assist with on-ground implementation as well. And they did that with Macquarie. They often do it for the Pacific Islands and things like that. Even Rat Island and Alaska was another example of that. So that, I suppose, is an attempt to put a framework around the stakeholder management side of this sort of work. As I said at the start, it's not much of it is about eradicating animals. It's all about talking with people and working with people to hopefully achieve a goal which you believe in and want to see happen, and you need the support from other people as well. So in closing, I'd just also again like to thank you for the opportunity and the invite to come and join you today, and a big thank you to the interpreters, and I hope I haven't spoken too quickly for them to get through.